Marco, is that you? My first high school love? If you fix my helicopter, I'll kiss you right now. Before we get into it, if this video found you at the right moment, let me know with your favorite emoji. The first thing Savannah Monroe noticed when the helicopter's engine coughed wasn't fear, it was irritation. She'd built a $3 billion tech empire by the age of 23, precisely because she refused to let complications derail her schedule, and an equipment malfunction 40 miles outside Henderson, Nevada, at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning definitely qualified as a complication. Ms. Monroe, her pilot's voice crackled through the headset, professional but tight. We're experiencing mechanical issues. I'm going to need to set us down. Savannah glanced up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing acquisition documents for a promising AI startup in San Francisco. Through the curved plexiglass, the Mojave Desert stretched endlessly below them, all burnt orange and shadow in the early light. Beautiful, in that harsh, unforgiving way that reminded her why she'd left Nevada the moment she turned 18. How serious? She asked, already calculating the delay this would cause. Serious enough that I'd rather be on the ground when I figure it out. The helicopter descended with practiced precision toward what appeared to be a small private airfield, really just a strip of cracked asphalt surrounded by hangars that had seen better decades. Savannah recognized the place vaguely. She'd flown over it countless times but never actually landed. It was the kind of operation that catered to crop dusters and wealthy hobbyists who preferred their aircraft old and their mechanics cheaper. They touched down with barely a shudder, testament to her pilot's skill. As the rotors wound down, Savannah unbuckled and climbed out, her Louboutins crunching on the desert gravel. The heat hit her immediately, dry, insistent, already climbing toward triple digits even though the sun had barely cleared the horizon. A figure emerged from the largest hangar, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. Tall, lean, moving with the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly what you were doing. He wore faded jeans and a gray t-shirt stretched across shoulders that suggested he did more with his days than sit behind a desk. Savannah's breath caught. Even from 50 feet away, even after 16 years, even though every logical bone in her body insisted it couldn't possibly be him, she knew. Marco Sullivan stopped dead when he saw her, the shop rag falling forgotten from his fingers. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the tarmac, the desert morning suddenly feeling much hotter than it had any right to be. Savannah's mind raced through calculations, trying to make sense of the impossible. Marco Sullivan, who'd been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship. Marco Sullivan, who'd been headed for aerospace engineering and a career at NASA or Boeing or anywhere brilliant minds went to build the future. Marco Sullivan, who'd kissed her behind the football bleachers the night before he disappeared from her life completely, was standing in front of her in a mechanic's uniform at a nowhere airfield in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Savannah. His voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by time and perhaps things she couldn't begin to guess at. Savannah Monroe. It's still Monroe, she said, hating how defensive that sounded. Yes, she'd been married briefly, spectacularly, disastrously briefly, but she'd never taken Richard's name. That at least had been smart. And you're here. I'm here. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the same crooked expression that had made her 17-year-old heart stumble. It still had that effect, she noted with profound annoyance. I own this place, actually. Sullivan Aviation Services. We do repairs, restorations, some custom work. Her pilot had joined them, looking between them with obvious confusion. You two know each other? We went to high school together, Savannah said quickly, before Marco could offer any other explanation. A long time ago. Can you fix the helicopter? Marco's expression shifted, something unreadable crossing his features before he turned his attention to the aircraft. Let me take a look. She watched him circle the helicopter with professional efficiency, his hands moving over the engine housing with familiar confidence. Those hands, she thought distantly, used to hold hers during lunch breaks, used to cup her face when he kissed her. Now they were scarred and calloused, stained with engine grease that probably never fully washed away. Fuel pumps shot, he announced after 10 minutes of examination. I can fix it, but I'll need to order the part. Might take a couple days. Days? Savannah felt her carefully controlled morning spiraling further from her grasp. I have meetings in San Francisco this afternoon. You could rent a car, drive to Vegas, catch a commercial flight. Marco straightened, meeting her gaze directly. His eyes were still that impossible shade of gray-green, like storm clouds over the ocean. Or you could wait while I make some calls, see if I can source the part faster. I've got contacts throughout the Southwest. The practical choice was obvious. She should absolutely get in a rental car and salvage what remained of her day. But something, call it curiosity, call it unfinished business, call it the irrational part of her brain that still remembered what it felt like to be 17 and in love, made her hesitate. How fast can you get it? Maybe by tonight, if I'm lucky. Tomorrow morning at the latest. He wiped his hands on his jeans, a gesture so familiar it hurt. There's a diner about 2 miles down the road if you want breakfast while you wait, or you're welcome to hang around here. I've got decent coffee in the office. Savannah looked at her pilot, who shrugged. Your call, Ms. Monroe. I'm fine either way. She should leave. Every instinct honed by years of business negotiations and carefully managed public appearances told her to maintain distance, to extract herself from this situation before it became complicated. But when would she ever have this chance again? When would the universe ever hand her answers to questions she'd stopped asking years ago because they hurt too much? I'll stay, she heard herself say, for a little while at least. The smile that crossed Marco's face was brief, but genuine. Office is this way. She followed him toward the largest hangar, hyper-aware of her designer suit and heels on the oil-stained concrete, of how utterly out of place she must look. The hangar's interior was surprisingly organized. Tools hung on pegboards with the precision of someone who understood the value of knowing exactly where things were, and several aircraft in various states of repair occupied the space. A vintage Cessna, a sleek experimental-looking single-engine plane that was probably someone's midlife crisis made manifest. The office was a glass-walled cube in the corner, crammed with filing cabinets, a battered desk, and what looked like a genuinely expensive espresso machine that seemed wildly incongruous with everything else. Gift from a client, Marco said, catching her glance. Tech executive from San Jose who collects warbirds. He insisted I needed better coffee if I was going to properly maintain his P-51 Mustang. You work on Mustangs? When I'm lucky enough to get them. He started the espresso machine, which hissed to life with professional enthusiasm. Most of my work is more mundane. Fuel systems, avionics upgrades, annual inspections. But every once in a while, something beautiful comes through those doors and reminds me why I love this job. Savannah perched on the edge of a filing cabinet, watching him move through the familiar ritual of coffee preparation. MIT? She said quietly. You had a full scholarship to MIT. You were supposed to change the world, Marco. What happened? His hand stilled for just a moment before continuing. Life happened. Plans changed. That's not an answer. No, he agreed, pulling 2 cups from a shelf that also held an impressive array of aviation manuals. But it's the one I'm giving right now. Cream, sugar, black. She accepted the cup, cradling it between her palms. The coffee was excellent, rich and smooth with hints of chocolate and caramel. This is really good. I may work with my hands now, but I still appreciate quality. There was no bitterness in his voice, which somehow made it worse. He leaned against his desk, studying her with the same intensity she remembered from trigonometry class, when he'd explained complex equations with a patience that made everything suddenly clear. Your turn. Savannah Monroe, tech billionaire. I've read the articles. Bytecore Technologies, revolutionary AI integration platforms, youngest female CEO to break $3 billion in valuation. Divorced at 22, which, and forgive me for saying this, seemed remarkably fast, even by Silicon Valley standards. 8 months, she said flatly. Married at 21 to Richard Castellano, venture capitalist and Olympic-level narcissist. Divorced 3 months after Bytecore's Series C funding, which coincidentally was right after he realized I'd never give him voting control of my company. He married you for your business? He married me because I was young, successful, and he thought naive. Turned out I was only 2 of those things. She took another sip of coffee, using it to steady herself. I built Bytecore from nothing, coded the initial platform in my dorm room at Stanford. Graduated at 20 with my BS, founded the company 6 months later. I'll be damned if I let some man take what I created just because I was stupid enough to believe in love. The last word came out sharper than she intended, edged with old pain that apparently wasn't as healed as she'd thought. Marco's expression softened. I'm sorry that happened to you. Don't be. I got out, kept my company, and learned a valuable lesson about trusting people. She met his gaze directly. Which brings me back to you. You don't get to just offer me coffee and deflect, Marco. You disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye, nothing. One day you were there and the next day you were just gone. Your parents moved away that summer. Nobody would tell me anything, I thought. She stopped herself before she could say what she'd actually thought during those awful weeks. That something terrible had happened to him. That he'd been in an accident. That he'd decided she wasn't worth saying goodbye to. You thought what? His voice was gentle but insistent. It doesn't matter now. It was 16 years ago. She set down her coffee cup with careful precision. We were kids. We were kids, he agreed. But that doesn't mean it didn't matter. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed insistently. She glanced at the screen. Her CFO, probably wondering where she was. The real world, with its demands and schedules and carefully maintained control, was calling her back. I need to take this, she said, stepping toward the door. But Marco, I'm not leaving until I get some actual answers. She walked out into the hangar, pressing the phone to her ear and shifting immediately into CEO mode, explaining the delay with the brisk confidence that made board members feel reassured, even when plans went sideways. But part of her brain remained in that office, trying to reconcile the boy she'd known with the man who'd chosen this life. A man who owned an aviation repair business in the middle of nowhere, who made excellent coffee and had apparently chosen to walk away from everything he'd been meant to become. She wondered what could possibly drive someone to make that choice. And more pressingly, she wondered why the sight of his grease-stained hands and crooked smile still made her heart beat faster after all these years. Through the office window, she could see him on the phone, presumably calling contacts about her helicopter part. His expression was focused, professional, but every so often his gaze would flicker toward her and she'd see something else there. Recognition, memory, and perhaps, if she wasn't imagining it, regret. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last traces of cool air, and Savannah Monroe realized that her carefully controlled day had just become significantly more complicated than a simple mechanical failure, because she'd learned long ago that the past never stayed buried forever. It just waited for the right moment to surface. And apparently, in the middle of the Mojave Desert on an ordinary Tuesday morning, her past had finally caught up with her. 2 hours later, Savannah had rescheduled 3 meetings, delegated 2 others to her vice president of operations, and was seriously reconsidering her decision to stay. Her pilot had accepted her offer to rent a car and check into a hotel in Henderson, leaving her alone at the airfield with Marco, and a growing list of questions she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. Marco had disappeared into the bowels of a Beechcraft Bonanza that apparently needed its entire instrument panel rewired, leaving her to wander the hangar like an expensive ghost. She'd shed her blazer in deference to the heat, but her silk blouse and pencil skirt still felt absurdly formal. At least she'd had the foresight to keep a pair of flats in the helicopter, though even those felt too delicate for the oil-stained concrete. You look lost. Marco's voice came from somewhere inside the Beechcraft. There's a break room through the back door if you need air conditioning. And if you're really bored, I've got a parts catalog that desperately needs updating in the filing system. Despite herself, Savannah smiled. Are you really trying to put a billionaire CEO to work organizing your filing? I figured it might be less boring than watching me feed wires through an instrument panel. He emerged from the aircraft, his gray t-shirt now decorated with additional smudges of grease. But if you'd rather supervise, I won't object to the company. She should absolutely take refuge in the air-conditioned break room and catch up on emails. Instead, she found herself climbing the portable stairs to peer into the Beechcraft's cockpit. What's wrong with it? Previous owner thought he could save money by doing his own avionics upgrade. Turns out he couldn't. Marco was back inside, his hands working with the kind of confident precision that came from years of practice. So now I get to spend the next week undoing his mistakes and installing everything properly. This is why people should leave complex electrical work to professionals. Is that what you tell yourself every time someone tries to save money? It's what I tell them before they ignore me and do it anyway. He glanced up at her, and the close confines of the cockpit suddenly felt much smaller. I'm charging him triple my normal rate for the fix, so at least there's justice in the world. Savannah found herself genuinely curious, despite the situation. Do you enjoy this? The work, I mean, not the overcharging part. Marco's hand stilled for a moment. Yeah, he said quietly. I really do. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again, about understanding how all the pieces fit together, and knowing exactly what needs to happen to get it right. He resumed working, feeding a wire through a narrow channel with careful patience. Plus, I get to work with aircraft every day. When I was a kid, that seemed like the best possible life I could imagine. Better than MIT, better than aerospace engineering at somewhere like SpaceX or Boeing. Different than those things. His voice was carefully neutral. Not better or worse. Just different. She wanted to push, to demand the real answer, but something in his posture made her hold back. Instead, she watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way he seemed to know instinctively which wire went where. His hands were steady, scarred in places with permanent grease under the nails that no amount of washing would fully remove. "You still bite your lower lip when you're concentrating," she said without thinking. Marco's hands froze. Then, slowly he turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was complicated enough that she immediately regretted speaking. "And you still tuck your hair behind your left ear when you're thinking," he said softly. "Some things don't change, I guess." The moment stretched between them, heavy with 16 years of unasked questions and unspoken words. Savannah became acutely aware of how close they were in the confined cockpit, of the fact that she'd have to brush past him to leave, of the way his eyes held the same intensity she remembered from all those years ago. Her phone rang, shattering the moment with ruthless efficiency. She fumbled for it, grateful for the interruption and annoyed by it in equal measure. "I should take this," she said unnecessarily, already backing out of the cockpit. "Sure." Marco had already turned back to his wiring, but she caught the tension in his shoulders. "I'll be here." She descended the stairs more quickly than was probably dignified, and answered the phone while walking toward the office. It was her head of security, checking in about the delayed schedule and wanting to know if she needed additional support. She assured him she was fine, that she'd be back in the air soon, that there was no security concern at a small private airfield in Nevada. But as she spoke, she wondered if that was entirely true, because there were all kinds of security, and the kind that protected you from emotional ambush might be just as important as the kind that kept you physically safe. Through the hangar window, she could see Marco in the Beechcraft's cockpit, his head bent over his work, completely focused. The boy she'd known had always been like that, utterly absorbed when something captured his interest, whether it was a complex calculus problem or understanding how her favorite song's bridge section worked. She'd loved that about him, the intensity, the curiosity, the way he made everything seem worth paying attention to. "Ms. Monroe?" Her security chief's voice pulled her back. "Are you sure you're all right?" "I'm fine," she said firmly. "Just a minor delay. I'll update you when I have a departure time." She ended the call and stood in the office doorway, looking around at the cluttered space that somehow still managed to feel organized. Aviation charts covered one wall marked with notations in Marco's neat handwriting. A whiteboard tracked current projects and their deadlines. On the desk, partially hidden under a parts catalog, she spotted something that made her breath catch. A photograph, old, faded, tucked into the corner of a larger frame that held some aviation certification. But she could still make out what it showed. 2 teenagers at a homecoming dance, her in a blue dress that had seemed impossibly sophisticated at the time, him in a rented tuxedo that fit awkwardly across his shoulders. They looked absurdly young, absurdly happy. She looked away quickly, feeling like she'd seen something private, something that answered questions she hadn't quite known how to ask. Marco Sullivan had kept a photograph of them. After 16 years, after walking away from everything, after building a completely different life, he'd kept a photograph. "Coffee's probably cold by now, but I can make fresh." Marco's voice came from behind her and she jumped, guilt flooding through her even though she'd done nothing wrong. "I'm fine." She turned to face him, trying to read his expression and failing. "Did you reach anyone about the part?" "Yeah, good news is I found one. Bad news is it's in Phoenix and my supplier can't get it here until tomorrow morning." He wiped his hands on his jeans again, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as habitual when he was buying time to think. "I know that's not ideal for your schedule. Tomorrow morning. 24 hours in Henderson, Nevada with nothing to do but wait and remember and ask questions she might not want answered." "It's fine," she lied. "I'll make it work. There's a decent hotel in Henderson. Bit generic, but clean." He paused. "Or if you want something nicer, Vegas is only about 20 minutes away. Henderson's fine." She pulled out her phone to search for options, grateful for the excuse to look at something other than his face. "I'll get a car, check in, catch up on work. Savannah." His voice was quiet but firm enough that she looked up. "I know this is weird, running into each other like this after all this time, and I know you have questions. I'd have questions too in your position. So if you want to grab dinner tonight, just as old friends, nothing complicated, I'll answer what I can. You deserve that much." Old friends. As if that's what they'd been. As if 16 years could reduce what they'd had to something safe and comfortable in past tense. But maybe that's exactly what time did. Maybe it turned everything into history. manageable and distant and incapable of hurting you anymore. Okay, she said. Dinner. But Marco, I'm going to hold you to that promise about answers. I know. He met her gaze steadily. 7 o'clock? There's a steakhouse in Henderson that's actually pretty good. The Desert Rose. I'll find it. She gathered her blazer and bag, suddenly desperate to leave before she said something she'd regret. Thank you for the coffee. And for finding the part. That's what I do. His crooked smile appeared briefly. Fix things that are broken. She was halfway to calling a car service when the implications of that statement hit her, when she wondered if he'd meant it as casually as it sounded, or if there were layers she was missing. But by then she was already walking toward the road, leaving Sullivan Aviation Services behind in a cloud of desert dust, and it was easier to pretend she hadn't heard the subtext at all. The hotel room was exactly as generic as Marco had predicted. Beige walls, floral bedspread, landscape paintings that could have been anywhere or nowhere. Savannah had seen 1,000 hotel rooms exactly like it, in cities across the country and around the world. Usually she barely noticed them. They were just places to sleep between meetings, between flights, between the endless demands of building and running a company. But today, the anonymity of it felt oppressive. She found herself staring at the ceiling, her laptop open but ignored beside her, trying to make sense of the morning's impossible collision of past and present. Marco Sullivan, here, now, after 16 years of silence. She'd spent the first year after he disappeared cycling through emotions like someone flipping through radio stations, never settling on any single feeling long enough for it to feel real. Worry gave way to anger, anger to hurt, hurt to a kind of numb acceptance that maybe some things just didn't have explanations. By the time she got to Stanford, she'd packed Marco away in the category of childhood memories, sweet while they lasted, but ultimately irrelevant to the person she was becoming. She'd dated other people, focused on her studies, built her company. She'd married Richard, for God's sake, and if that didn't prove she'd moved on, what would? Except now, seeing Marco again, she realized she'd never actually let him go. She'd just buried him deeper. Her phone buzzed with a message from her CFO about the postponed San Francisco meetings. She responded with efficient brevity, then found herself pulling up a search engine and typing Sullivan Aviation Services, Nevada, before she could talk herself out of it. The website was professional but modest, a single page showing the services offered, some photographs of aircraft in various stages of repair, and a brief bio that told her almost nothing she wanted to know. Marco Sullivan, owner and chief mechanic, FAA certified airframe and power plant mechanic, 15 years of experience, specializing in vintage aircraft restoration and modern avionics integration, 15 years. He must have started working in aviation almost immediately after leaving Massachusetts, after abandoning MIT, after walking away from everything. She dug deeper, searching for anything that might explain the gap, the transformation from promising student to mechanic. But Marco Sullivan turned out to be frustratingly common as names went, and none of the results seemed to match the man she'd spent the morning with. Finally, she closed her laptop and forced herself to shower and change. She'd brought an overnight bag in the helicopter. She always traveled prepared for delays, and selected the most casual outfit she'd packed: dark jeans, a simple black silk t-shirt, and low heels. Still more polished than the situation called for, but at least she wouldn't look like she was heading to a board meeting. The Desert Rose turned out to be exactly the kind of place she'd expected. Red leather booths, dim lighting, a menu that featured steaks in every possible configuration. Marco was already there when she arrived, seated in a booth near the back, wearing clean jeans and a dark blue button-down shirt that made his eyes look more green than gray. He stood when he saw her, and she was struck again by how much he'd changed and how much he'd stayed the same. Taller, broader, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent a lot of time squinting into the sun. But the way he moved, the way he looked at her, that was pure Marco, unchanged by time or distance. "You found it okay," he said, and she wondered if he was as nervous as she was. GPS is a wonderful thing. She slid into the booth across from him, grateful for the table between them. "Though I'm surprised you suggested somewhere so nice. I figured you'd pick a diner. I save the diners for lunch." His crooked smile appeared. "But I thought you might appreciate something with wine and cloth napkins for dinner." "Considerate of you." She accepted a menu from the hovering waiter, scanning it without really seeing anything. "Though you always were considerate. That was one of the things I liked about you." Past tense? Well, I don't know you anymore, do I? Maybe you've become inconsiderate in the last 16 years. I'm sure I have in some ways. Marco waited until the waiter had taken their drink orders, red wine for her, whiskey for him, before continuing. We all become different people, given enough time. That's what I'm trying to understand. Savannah leaned forward, deciding to stop dancing around it. You were brilliant, Marco. Everyone knew it. Teachers, students, even my parents, who barely noticed anyone who wasn't me. You were going to do something amazing with your life, and instead you're fixing helicopters in the desert? I wasn't going to put it that bluntly, but that's what you're thinking. He took a sip of whiskey when it arrived, and she noticed his hands were cleaner than they'd been that morning, though traces of grease still lingered around his nails. You're thinking I wasted my potential, that I took the easy path instead of the one I was supposed to follow. I'm thinking, she said carefully, that there must be a reason, a good reason, because the Marco I knew wouldn't have walked away from MIT without one. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, an understanding, maybe, or an acknowledgement that they were finally going to talk about the thing they'd both been avoiding. My father had a stroke, Marco said quietly, 2 weeks after graduation. Massive, sudden, left him partially paralyzed and unable to work. My mother had to become his full-time caregiver. My younger sister was only 14. We lost our house, our savings, everything, paying for medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. Savannah felt the breath leave her lungs. Marco, MIT didn't care about personal problems. The scholarship covered tuition, but I'd need living expenses, books, everything else. And I couldn't ask my mother for money she didn't have while she was trying to keep our family from falling apart. He turned the whiskey glass in his hands, watching the amber liquid catch the light. So I made a choice. I found work instead. Started as an apprentice mechanic at a small airport near Boston. Learned everything I could. Saved every penny. Sent money home whenever I could spare it. Eventually worked my way up, got my certifications. Moved around the country gaining experience. But you could have gone back, she said, even though she could hear the weakness in her own argument. Eventually, once things stabilized. By the time things stabilized, I was 24 and hadn't been in a classroom for 6 years. I had a career I was good at. My father passed away that year, complications from the stroke, and my mother needed consistent support. My sister was in community college, working her way through slowly. Going back to MIT would have meant starting over, accumulating debt, gambling that an engineering degree at 28 would be worth more than the established career I already had. He met her gaze directly. So no, I didn't go back. I chose this life instead, and I don't regret it. Savannah absorbed this, trying to reconcile it with the narrative she'd built in her head over the years. She'd imagined a dozen different reasons for his disappearance, none of them as devastating or as selfless as the truth. Why didn't you tell me? The words came out smaller than she'd intended. Why didn't you call, write, explain? I would have understood. I could have helped. You were 17 and about to leave for Stanford with a full ride and a brilliant future. What were you going to do, Savannah? Send me money your parents gave you for textbooks? Drop out to work minimum wage jobs? I wasn't going to let you derail your life because mine fell apart. That wasn't your decision to make. Maybe not, but it's the one I made. He signaled the waiter for another whiskey. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have told you everything, let you make your own choice. But I was 18 and terrified and trying to hold my family together with both hands. Maintaining a long-distance relationship with my high school girlfriend wasn't exactly my top priority. The words stung, even though she understood the logic behind them. Is that all I was? Your high school girlfriend? Marco's expression softened. No, you were the girl I loved more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You were the person who made me think the future might actually be as bright as everyone kept saying it would be. You were... He stopped, shaking his head. You were everything, Savannah, which is exactly why I couldn't drag you down with me. The waiter arrived with their food and they both fell silent, the weight of confession settling between them like another presence at the table. Savannah picked at her steak without tasting it, her mind racing through implications and might-have-beens. I'm sorry, she said finally. About your father, about all of it. That's horrible and you shouldn't have had to deal with it alone. I wasn't alone, I had my family. Marco cut into his own steak with mechanical precision. And eventually I rebuilt. Moved to Nevada 5 years ago. Bought the airfield when the previous owner retired. It's not MIT. It's not what anyone expected. But it's mine, and I'm good at it, and most days that's enough. Most days? Nobody's life turns out exactly how they planned it, right? You of all people should know that. She thought about Richard, about the way her marriage had imploded, about all the assumptions she'd made that turned out to be wrong. Fair point. They ate in silence for a while, the restaurant's ambient noise filling the gaps in their conversation. Savannah found herself studying Marco's face, cataloging the changes, the deeper lines around his eyes, the hint of gray at his temples, the way he held himself with quiet confidence that had nothing to do with status or wealth. He'd grown into himself, she realized. Become fully the person he was always meant to be, just not in the way anyone had predicted. Can I ask you something? Marco's voice pulled her back to the present. That photograph in your helicopter, the one of you and your ex-husband at what looked like your wedding. Why do you still carry it? Savannah stiffened. I don't. Then she remembered. The small frame tucked into her bag, visible when she'd pulled out her tablet. It's not what you think. I keep it as a reminder. Of what? Of how easy it is to make catastrophic decisions when you trust the wrong person. She took a long sip of wine. Richard was charming, successful, everything my board of directors thought I should want. And I was young and stupid enough to think that was the same thing as love. I keep that photo to remind myself that I'm capable of spectacularly bad judgment when I don't listen to my instincts. Your instincts were screaming at you not to marry him? My instincts were whispering doubts I convinced myself were just cold feet. She set down her wine glass, meeting his gaze directly. You know what the worst part was? The whole time I was with Richard, there was this voice in the back of my head comparing him to someone else. Someone who'd actually made me feel safe and understood and like I could be completely myself. Someone who'd disappeared 16 years ago without explanation. Marco went very still. Savannah, I'm not saying I've spent 16 years pining for you. I haven't. I built a life, a company, a reputation. I moved on. She paused, searching for the right words. But I never quite forgot what it felt like to be with someone who saw me instead of what I could do for them. And every relationship after you, including my disaster of a marriage, fell short of that standard. The air between them felt electric, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Marco leaned forward, his gray-green eyes intense in the dim restaurant lighting. If I'd known, he started. What? What would you have done differently? She heard the challenge in her own voice. You made your choice, Marco. You chose your family over everything else, including me. And I understand why. I even respect it. But that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase 16 years of silence. No, he agreed quietly. It doesn't. Nothing can erase that. But maybe. He hesitated, and she watched him struggle with whatever he wanted to say next. Maybe we can figure out what exists now. Not 16 years ago. Now. What exists now? She repeated the words slowly, testing their weight. We're strangers, Marco. We knew each other as kids. That's not the same thing as knowing each other as adults. So let's change that. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, but not quite touching. You're stuck here until tomorrow morning anyway. No meetings to rush to. No board members demanding your attention. Spend some time with me. Let me show you who I am now. And you can decide if that's someone worth knowing. Savannah looked at his hand, so close to hers, and felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained for so long. What did she have to lose? Tomorrow she'd fly back to her real life, back to conference rooms and quarterly reports and the carefully constructed world where she was always in control. But tonight, in this unremarkable steakhouse in Henderson, Nevada, she could be just Savannah, not the CEO, not the divorced billionaire, not the cautionary tale or the success story, just herself. She closed the distance between their hands, her fingers brushing his. Okay, show me. They left the restaurant an hour later, after splitting a dessert neither of them really wanted, and finishing a bottle of wine that made everything feel slightly softer around the edges. The desert night had turned cool, stars blazing overhead with an intensity she'd forgotten was possible. In San Francisco, light pollution bleached the sky to a dull orange glow. Here, the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river of light. I forgot how many stars there were, she said, tilting her head back to take it all in. City living will do that. Marco stood beside her in the parking lot, hands in his pockets, looking up at the same sky. This is one of the things I love about living out here. No matter how complicated the day gets, the stars remind you how small your problems really are. I'm not sure I find that comforting. If my problems are small, doesn't that make me small too? Small isn't the same as insignificant. He glanced at her, and in the starlight his features looked softer, younger. Every star up there is massive beyond comprehension, and together they're still just one small part of something unimaginably larger. doesn't make them any less bright. Despite herself, Savannah smiled. That's very philosophical for a mechanic. I contain multitudes. His crooked grin flashed in the darkness. Come on, I want to show you something. Show me what? You'll see. Trust me. She shouldn't. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that she should go back to her hotel, get some sleep, maintain appropriate boundaries with a man who'd broken her heart 16 years ago, however good his reasons. But the wine had made her reckless, and the stars had made her remember what it felt like to believe in possibility, and Marco was looking at her with that same intensity that used to make her forget to breathe. Fine, she heard herself say, but if you're taking me somewhere to murder me and steal my company, I should warn you that my security team knows exactly where I am. Noted. Though if I wanted your company, there are much easier ways to get it than murder. He walked toward a pickup truck that had clearly seen better decades. Rust spots along the wheel wells. A crack in the windshield. Paint faded by years of desert sun. Your chariot awaits. Savannah looked at the truck, then at her designer jeans, then back at the truck. You know, people usually try to impress billionaires with nicer vehicles. If I wanted to impress you, I'd have done it with my helicopter repair skills. He opened the passenger door with a theatrical flourish. Besides, this truck has character. That's worth more than shine. She climbed in, noting the worn seats and the faint smell of motor oil that apparently came standard with dating. Not dating, she corrected herself quickly. Spending time with a mechanic. The radio was tuned to a classic rock station, and when Marco started the engine, Led Zeppelin poured from the speakers. They drove in comfortable silence through Henderson's industrial outskirts, past strip malls and auto shops and all the unglamorous infrastructure that kept cities running. Then Marco turned onto a dirt road that wound into the hills, the truck bouncing over ruts that would have horrified her Tesla's suspension system. Where are we going? She asked, gripping the door handle as they hit a particularly deep pothole. Patience. We're almost there. 5 minutes later, they crested a rise and Marco killed the engine. Below them, the lights of Henderson and Las Vegas sprawled across the valley floor like spilled diamonds. Above them, the stars burned with impossible brightness. And between the two, on this empty hilltop in the middle of nowhere, Savannah felt suspended between worlds. This is my thinking spot, Marco said, climbing out of the truck. When everything gets too loud, I come up here and remember why I chose this life. She joined him, and together they sat on the truck's lowered tailgate, legs dangling, looking out at the view. The night air smelled of sage and dust, and something indefinable that might just have been desert. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Yeah, but when she glanced over, he was looking at her, not the view. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger and all the unfinished business of 16 years. Savannah felt her heart beating faster, felt the wine making her braver than she should be, felt the pull of something she thought was safely buried. Marco, she started. I know. He turned to face the valley. I know this is complicated. I know we can't just pick up where we left off like no time has passed. I know you have a life in San Francisco that doesn't include a mechanic from nowhere, Nevada. That's not... Let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm. You asked me earlier if I regretted my choice. If I regretted giving up MIT and everything that came with it. The truth is, I regret a lot of things. I regret that my father got sick. I regret that my family suffered. I regret that I wasn't strong enough or smart enough to find a way to have everything. But the one thing I've never regretted, not for a single day, was letting you go. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Because you got to become this. He gestured at her, encompassing everything. Her success, her confidence, her carefully constructed life. You got to build something extraordinary. You got to prove to the world and yourself that you were exactly as brilliant as I always knew you were. If I'd asked you to follow me into my disaster of a life, if I'd let you sacrifice your future for mine, he shook his head. I couldn't have lived with myself. I loved you too much to let you throw away everything for someone who couldn't even take care of his own family. Savannah felt tears burning behind her eyes. You're an idiot. Probably. You should have told me. You should have trusted me to make my own choice. Yeah. He looked at her now, his gray-green eyes reflecting starlight. I should have. Add it to the list of regrets. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to hold on to the righteous fury of someone who'd been denied agency, who'd been protected without asking for protection. But looking at his face, seeing the weight of 16 years of carrying this alone, she found she couldn't sustain it. I would have waited for you, she said softly. I would have worked, sent you money, done whatever I could to help. We could have figured it out together. I know. That's what terrified me. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. You would have given up everything, and I would have let you because I was 18 and in love and desperate. And then one day you would have woken up and realized what you'd sacrificed, and you would have hated me for it. Maybe not right away, maybe not for years, but eventually. You don't know that, don't I? He smiled sadly. Savannah, you just told me you kept a photo of your ex-husband to remind yourself of bad decisions. What do you think you'd have felt about me if I'd let you derail your entire life? She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, because he might be right. Because at 17, she'd been full of grand romantic notions about love conquering all, about sacrificing everything for the right person. At 23, after building a company and surviving a disastrous marriage, she understood that love without respect, without equal partnership, without both people standing on solid ground, wasn't sustainable. I hate that you might have a point, she admitted. I hate that I had to make the choice at all. He squeezed her hand gently. But for what it's worth, seeing you now, seeing everything you've become, it makes it hurt a little less. You got to be exactly who you were meant to be. That matters. They sat in silence for a while, hands linked, looking out at the lights of the valley. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, the sound lonely and wild and strangely fitting. What now? Savannah asked finally. Tomorrow I get in my helicopter and fly away. You go back to fixing aircraft. This becomes just another weird story we tell at parties. Remember that time I ran into my ex-boyfriend after 16 years? Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. She turned to look at him, really look at him, trying to see past the surface to whatever truth lay beneath. Part of me wants to forget this ever happened. Keep my life simple. Keep my boundaries clear. I've worked too hard to build my walls just to tear them down for someone who already left once. And the other part? The other part remembers what it felt like to be 17 and in love with you, and wonders if that person still exists somewhere under all the armor I've built. Marco lifted their linked hands, studying them in the starlight. I think she does. I saw glimpses of her today, in the way you rolled your eyes at my terrible coffee joke, in the way you got genuinely interested when I explained what was wrong with the Beechcraft's avionics. You're still in there, Savannah. You've just gotten better at protecting her. I had to. The world doesn't reward vulnerability in women who run companies. No, he agreed. I don't suppose it does. He released her hand and slid off the tailgate, standing to face her. So here's what I propose. No grand romantic gestures, no declarations, no pressure. But maybe we don't have to go back to being strangers. Maybe we can be, he paused, searching for the right word, friends who have complicated history and genuinely enjoy talking to each other. Friends. Friends. With the possibility of more, if the timing and circumstances and 1,000 other variables somehow align. But no expectations, no demands. You go back to San Francisco and run your empire. I stay here and fix helicopters. And maybe once in a while, we call each other. See how life's treating us. Remember that we mattered to each other once. It was reasonable. It was mature. It was exactly the kind of boundary-respecting relationship that made sense for two adults with complicated lives and 16 years of history between them. It was also, Savannah realized, the coward's way out, the safe choice, the option that protected them both from risk and disappointment and the possibility of getting hurt again. Okay, she heard herself say. Friends. But even as she agreed, even as Marco smiled and offered his hand to help her down from the tailgate, she wondered if either of them actually believed it. Because the way her heart was racing, the way his touch sent electricity through her, the way the desert night felt full of possibility and promise, none of that felt remotely like friendship. They drove back to her hotel in silence, the radio playing songs she half remembered from a youth that seemed simultaneously yesterday and a lifetime ago. When Marco pulled up to the entrance, she found herself reluctant to leave, to let the evening end. Thank you, she said, for the dinner, the view, the honesty. I needed to know what happened, why you left. Even if it hurts, it's better than not knowing. Thank you for listening, for not hating me. He smiled, that crooked expression that still made her breath catch. Your helicopter should be fixed by mid-morning. I'll call when it's ready. Okay. She reached for the door handle, then paused. Marco, for what it's worth, I think you built something good here. Different than what everyone expected, but good. You should be proud of that. I am. Most days. He studied her face in the dim light from the hotel entrance. And Savannah, I know I already said this, but seeing who you've become, It's the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time. She wanted to kiss him. The urge was sudden and overwhelming, a pull so strong she almost gave into it. But friendship was supposed to be simple, uncomplicated, and kissing your ex-boyfriend definitely didn't qualify as either of those things. So instead, she squeezed his hand once, climbed out of the truck, and walked into the hotel without looking back. Because if she looked back, if she saw his expression, she might do something reckless. And Savannah Monroe, CEO of Bytecore Technologies, hadn't built a $3 billion company by doing reckless things. Except, her treacherous heart whispered as she rode the elevator to her floor. Maybe that was exactly the problem. Sleep didn't come easily. Savannah lay in the generic hotel bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the entire impossible day. Every conversation, every glance, every moment when the past and present had collided with uncomfortable force. She should feel relieved. She'd gotten her answers. She understood now why Marco had disappeared, and while it hurt that he hadn't trusted her with the truth, she could see the logic in his choice. They'd been kids. He'd been drowning in circumstances beyond his control. Of course, he'd made the decision that seemed least destructive at the time, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. It just made the hurt more complicated. Around 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep and opened her laptop, intending to catch up on the work she'd neglected all day. But instead of reviewing documents, she found herself searching for information about Marco's father, about medical bankruptcies, about all the ways life could derail even the most promising futures. The statistics were devastating. Hundreds of thousands of families every year, destroyed by medical debt. Brilliant students forced to abandon education for survival. The American dream turning into a nightmare because someone got sick at the wrong time. She wondered how many other Marco Sullivans were out there. How many potential engineers and doctors and teachers were fixing helicopters or working retail or doing whatever it took to keep their families afloat. On impulse, she pulled up Bytecore's charitable foundation information. They donated millions every year to various causes. STEM education, women in tech, disaster relief. All worthy, all important. But maybe, she thought, they could do more. Maybe there was a way to help families like Marco's had been. Scholarships for students dealing with medical crises. Emergency funds for education interrupted by circumstance. Something that acknowledged that talent and potential didn't stop mattering just because life became difficult. She made a note to discuss it with her foundation director, then closed the laptop and tried again to sleep. This time, exhaustion finally won, and she drifted into dreams where she was 17 again, standing behind the football bleachers while Marco kissed her and promised that nothing would ever change, that they'd always find their way back to each other. Even in her dreams, she knew it was a promise neither of them could keep. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight through inadequate curtains and her phone buzzing insistently with accumulated messages from her team. Savannah dealt with them efficiently while drinking terrible hotel coffee, slipping back into her CEO persona-like armor. Marco called at 10:30. Good news. Part arrived early, and I've got your helicopter ready to go. You can head out whenever you want. I'll call for a car. Give me 45 minutes. Sounds good. I'll have the paperwork ready. He sounded professional, distant, like the emotional conversation of the previous night had never happened. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe they both needed to remember that last night had been an anomaly, a brief moment out of time, and now reality was reasserting itself. She dressed in one of her spare business suits, restored her makeup to boardroom perfection, and generally transformed herself back into the Savannah Monroe that Forbes magazine had profiled, that the Wall Street Journal had called the future of AI integration. The woman who definitely didn't get emotionally involved with ex-boyfriends who fixed helicopters in the desert. The car arrived exactly on time. She'd called her preferred service rather than using a local company, and 45 minutes later, she was pulling up to Sullivan Aviation Services. The morning sun made everything look bleached and harsh. All the romantic mystique of the previous night burned away by daylight. Marco met her outside the main hangar, and she noticed he'd also reverted to professional mode. Clean work clothes, neutral expression, the easy confidence of someone dealing with a client rather than someone who'd held her hand under the stars. Everything checked out perfectly, he said, walking her toward the helicopter. Replaced the fuel pump, ran diagnostics on all systems, test started the engine twice, you're good to go. Thank you. She pulled out her wallet. What do I owe you? Already billed to your company account. Your pilot gave me the information yesterday. He handed her a manila folder with the service records. And I threw in a complimentary avionics check, since you were here anyway. Everything looks good, but your communication system could use an upgrade in the next 6 months. Not urgent, but worth considering. I'll pass that along to our flight operations team. She tucked the folder under her arm, suddenly awkward. How did you say goodbye to someone who'd been your first love, your biggest regret, and your most confusing present-day encounter, all in the span of 24 hours? Savannah, Marco started. We should probably, she said at the same time. They both stopped, and despite everything, she felt a laugh bubbling up. You first. I just wanted to say. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from 1,000 moments when he'd been trying to find the right words. I'm glad this happened. The helicopter breaking down, I mean. Getting to see you again, to explain everything. It matters to me that you know the truth. It matters to me, too. She paused, trying to find words that were honest without being dangerous. I meant what I said last night about staying in touch. I'd like that, if you would. Yeah. His crooked smile appeared, brief but genuine. I'd like that too. Her pilot emerged from the hangar, where he'd apparently been inspecting Marco's work, and gave her a thumbs up. We're ready when you are, Ms. Monroe. This was it. The moment she got back in the helicopter, flew away, and let this strange interlude in her carefully controlled life become just another story, just another memory. Take care of yourself, Marco Sullivan, she said softly. You too, Savannah Monroe. He stepped back, hands in his pockets, watching as she climbed into the helicopter. And Savannah, if you ever need a mechanic who makes decent coffee and occasionally says profound things about stars, you know where to find me. She smiled despite herself, strapping in as her pilot started the pre-flight check. Through the plexiglass, she could see Marco stepping further back, and she wondered if he looked as reluctant about this goodbye as she felt. The rotors spun up, and they lifted off, the ground falling away beneath them. She watched Sullivan Aviation Services shrink below them, the hangar, the office, the tarmac where her life had unexpectedly intersected with her past. And Marco standing in the middle of it all, one hand raised in farewell, growing smaller and smaller until he was just a speck, and then he was gone entirely, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the desert. Savannah turned forward, forcing herself to focus on the day ahead. She had meetings to reschedule, a company to run, a carefully constructed future to maintain. But as Henderson disappeared behind them and the Nevada desert stretched endlessly below, she found herself thinking about stars, about the difference between small and insignificant, about promises made and kept and broken and reforged, about what it meant to choose safety over possibility, and about whether, just maybe, there might be a third option she hadn't considered yet. Her phone buzzed with a text message, unknown number, in case you need that mechanic, or just want to talk about stars. She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the reply button. Then, before she could overthink it, she typed back, "Thank you, for everything." She hit send and watched the message disappear into the digital ether, carrying with it all the possibility and uncertainty and complicated hope that she didn't quite know what to do with yet. But maybe, she thought as San Francisco's skyline finally appeared on the horizon, maybe not knowing was okay. Maybe some questions didn't need immediate answers. Maybe some connections were worth maintaining even when you couldn't see exactly where they led. And maybe, just maybe, the story of Savannah Monroe and Marco Sullivan wasn't quite finished after all. 3 months passed before Savannah admitted to herself that the text messages with Marco had become the best part of her days. It started innocently enough, a funny observation about a client, a question about some obscure aviation fact she'd encountered in a meeting, a photograph of the San Francisco fog that made the Golden Gate Bridge look like it was floating in clouds. His responses came at odd hours, between repair jobs and late-night paperwork, filled with the same dry humor and unexpected insight she remembered. But somewhere between September and November, the messages shifted, became deeper, more personal. He told her about his mother's remarriage to a kind man who made her laugh, about his sister finishing her nursing degree, about the restored P-51 Mustang that made him feel like he was touching history every time he worked on it. She told him about the pressure of quarterly earnings calls, about her fear that Bitecore's success had become so large she couldn't control it anymore, about the loneliness of being the youngest person in every boardroom, the only woman at most tables, constantly fighting to be taken seriously while also being held to impossible standards. You know what your problem is? Marco texted one night at 11:30, after she'd sent him a frustrated message about a board member questioning her judgment. You're so busy being perfect that you've forgotten how to be human. She'd stared at that message for 10 minutes before responding. Being human is expensive when you're a woman running a billion-dollar company. Then maybe the company is costing too much. The words haunted her, because he wasn't wrong. Bytecore had given her everything: wealth, power, respect, the ability to prove to the world that she was exactly as brilliant as she'd always believed. But it had also taken things she hadn't quite acknowledged until Marco pointed them out. Her spontaneity, her joy, her willingness to trust people, her ability to believe in anything that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports. It was Marco who called her the night everything changed. 2 a.m., on a Friday in late November, her phone buzzing insistently until she fumbled for it in the darkness. "Marco, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." His voice was excited, almost boyish. "Get up. Look outside. The Leonids are peaking tonight. Best meteor shower of the year. I'm watching them from my hilltop, and I just thought, you should see this." She should have said no. Should have gone back to sleep. Preserved her boundaries. Remembered all the very good reasons why a phone call at 2 a.m. from a man in Nevada shouldn't make her heart race. Instead, she got out of bed, wrapped herself in a blanket, and stepped onto her apartment's balcony. San Francisco's light pollution made stargazing nearly impossible, but she could see a few bright points piercing the urban glow. "I can't see much," she admitted, phone pressed to her ear. "That's because you're in the wrong place." She could hear the smile in his voice. "City living will do that. Out here it looks like the sky is falling. Streaks of light everywhere, like someone's writing messages we're not quite smart enough to read. Poetic for a mechanic. I contain multitudes." That phrase again, the one that had become something of a running joke between them. "Savannah? Yeah? I miss you." The words were simple, direct, devastating in their honesty. "I know we said friends. I know you have your life and I have mine, but I miss you. Not the memory of you. You. The person who sends me sarcastic texts about board meetings and asks genuinely thoughtful questions about engine combustion ratios. The woman you've become." Savannah felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Marco, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Because life's too short to not say the important things, and somewhere between September and November, you became important to me again." He paused. "Or maybe you never stopped being important, and I just finally admitted it." She stood on her balcony, wrapped in her blanket, looking at a sky she couldn't really see, and felt something crack inside her. Some wall she'd built so carefully. Some defense she'd maintained so vigilantly. "I have a board meeting Monday morning," she heard herself say. "Critical strategy session about our Q4 projections. Probably the most important meeting of the year." "Okay," Marco said carefully, clearly not understanding where she was going with this. "Which means I have the weekend free." She took a deep breath, feeling reckless and terrified, and more alive than she'd felt in months. "What if I flew to Henderson tomorrow, just for a day? No pressure, no expectations, just, I'd like to see those stars you keep talking about." The silence stretched so long she wondered if the connection had dropped. Then, "Are you serious?" "Probably not. I'm probably having some kind of breakdown brought on by sleep deprivation and too many board meetings." She laughed, and it sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. "But yes, I'm serious if the offer's still open. Savannah Monroe, the offer will always be open." His voice was warm, full of something she was afraid to name. "I'll pick you up at the airport. What time?" "I'll charter a flight for noon. Text you when I land. I'll be there." She ended the call and stood on her balcony for a long time after, wondering what she'd just agreed to, what she was risking, what she might find if she let herself be vulnerable enough to look. But underneath the fear, underneath the uncertainty was something else. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. The charter flight took 2 hours. Plenty of time for Savannah to reconsider, to cancel, to remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But she didn't. She sat in the small luxury cabin, pretending to work on her laptop while actually just staring at the clouds below and wondering if she'd lost her mind. Marco was waiting when she landed, leaning against his truck like something out of a movie, and when he smiled at her, that crooked, genuine expression that still made her breath catch, she knew she'd made the right choice, however crazy it seemed. "You came," he said, taking her bag. "I came." She climbed into the truck, feeling like she was stepping into an alternate version of her life. "So show me these famous stars." They spent the afternoon at his airfield, and she found herself genuinely fascinated by his work. He was restoring a vintage Stearman biplane, the kind used for training pilots during World War II, and his passion for the project was infectious. "There's something perfect about old aircraft," he explained, his hands moving over the plane's wooden frame with reverent care. "Modern planes are all composites and computers, which is fine, efficient, safe. But these, you can see how every piece fits together. Understand the logic of the design. Fix things with actual tools instead of diagnostic software." "You sound like you're describing a philosophy of life." "Maybe I am." He glanced at her, and the late afternoon light made his gray-green eyes look almost golden. "Sometimes the old ways of doing things, the slower, more deliberate ways, turn out to be better than we give them credit for." She wondered if they were still talking about airplanes. That evening he drove her back to his hilltop, and the stars were exactly as spectacular as he'd promised. They lay side by side on blankets in the truck bed, the desert night cool but not cold, the sky so full of light it seemed impossible. "Thank you," Savannah said quietly, "for this, for being patient with me while I figured out what I wanted." "What do you want?" Marco turned his head to look at her, and she could feel the weight of the question, the importance of her answer. "Honestly, I'm terrified." She kept her eyes on the stars, finding it easier to be honest when she wasn't looking at him. "I've spent 6 years building walls, protecting myself, making sure I never give anyone power over me again. And here you are, with your crooked smile and your profound observations about stars, making me want to tear all those walls down." "You don't have to tear them all down." His hand found hers in the darkness, warm and calloused and steady. "Maybe just leave a door open. See what happens." She turned to face him then and found him already looking at her with an expression that made her heart ache. "What if I hurt you? What if this doesn't work? Our lives are completely different, Marco. I live in San Francisco, run a billion-dollar company. You're here, with your airfield and your philosophy. How does that even function?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Wouldn't you?" And there it was, the question she'd been avoiding since that first helicopter breakdown 3 months ago. Did she have the courage to risk her carefully protected heart? To believe that maybe, possibly, some things were worth the danger? "If you arrumar," she said softly, using the Portuguese phrase she'd picked up from her Brazilian investors. "Eu te beio agora." Marco's eyes widened slightly, and she realized with a start that he knew what it meant. Of course he did. He'd always been brilliant with languages. "If I fix what?" "Me. Us. This impossible situation we've found ourselves in." She felt herself smiling despite the fear. "If you can figure out how to make this work, I'll kiss you. Right now. Under these stars you keep telling me about. That's a hell of a challenge." But he was smiling too, that crooked expression that had captured her heart at 17, and apparently still had the power to undo her at 23. "Lucky for you, I'm good at fixing impossible things." He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of 16 years of waiting, and Savannah felt something inside her finally settle into place. Some piece she hadn't known was missing until it clicked home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, she laughed. "I should probably warn you that I'm a disaster at relationships, and I should probably warn you that I'm ridiculously stubborn about things I care about." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so familiar it hurt. "So we'll figure it out. The distance, the differences, all of it. We'll figure it out because the alternative, walking away from this, is worse than any risk we'd be taking." That's very philosophical for a mechanic. "I contain multitudes, yes, I know." She kissed him again, because she could, because he was here and real, and choosing her despite all the complications. "So how do we do this? Realistically? Realistically? You visit when you can. I fly to San Francisco when I can close the airfield for a weekend. We text, call, video chat like teenagers. We take it slow, see where it goes, and trust that if we both want this enough, we'll find a way to make it work." It sounded simple when he said it like that. It probably wouldn't be simple at all. There would be complications, logistical nightmares, board members who wouldn't understand, public scrutiny if the press found out that the billionaire tech CEO was dating a mechanic from Nevada. But looking at Marco's face in the starlight, feeling his hand warm in hers, Savannah realized she didn't care about any of that. For the first time in 6 years, maybe for the first time in her entire adult life, she was choosing something that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets or quarterly reports. She was choosing possibility over safety, hope over certainty, love, because yes, she could finally admit it was love, over the careful control that had protected her but also slowly suffocated her. "Okay," she said. "Let's try. Let's see if we can fix this impossible thing." Marco's answering smile was bright enough to rival the stars. We already started. The moment your helicopter broke down in the middle of nowhere, the moment fate decided to give us a second chance, we already started fixing it. And under the Nevada stars, wrapped in blankets and each other, Savannah Monroe allowed herself to believe that maybe some things were worth the risk. That maybe the best stories weren't the safe ones, but the ones where you chose love despite every logical reason not to. That maybe, just maybe, finding your way back to your first love after 16 years wasn't the end of something, but the beginning of everything else. 3 months later, when Marco surprised her by showing up at Bitecore's holiday party with a small velvet box and a speech about how he'd spent 16 years learning to fix broken things, but she was the only thing he wanted to spend the rest of his life keeping whole, Savannah realized something important. Sometimes the universe broke things precisely so they could be put back together better than they were before. Sometimes the best engineering wasn't about building something new, but about understanding what had always been there, what had always mattered, what was always worth saving. And sometimes love was exactly that simple and that complicated, and that perfectly, impossibly right.